Hi, folks. Welcome to the latest edition of the Serverless Craic, our blog. We're just back from a little summer break, so we thought we'd get things going again. We've had a nice summer. We've kind of been enjoying ourselves. My name's Dave Anderson. I'm just sitting here relaxing. I'm in sunny Greece at the minute for a conference. Hey, Mark, how's it going? How you doing?
Going good. Working away. Did an event storming this morning, which was a good crack. Yeah. Looking forward to getting back into recording some serverless crack videos.
Good
Yeah.
stuff. What about you, Mike? How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm well rested after our summer break, so keen to get into a lot of our serverless crack. So all good, all good.
That's it. Back on it. It's been a good summer. I mean, one thing I started to notice, it's mad to see the rise of sort of just serverless becoming a normal thing. A lot more people talking about EDA and event-driven architecture, and even well architected is kind of growing. It seems like there's a maturity thing happening. I'm starting to notice with a lot of the stuff around the book, there's an awful lot of interest around modernization, and like we're in the cloud now. How do we take it to the next level? And to me, that's serverless EDA and well architected. And what a lot of people are talking about is resilience. How because things it was Werner says things fail all the time. So how do you kind of make sure you can kind of be resilient in your workloads? So it's nice to see a lot of things coming out over the last couple of months on that.
Yeah, that's you're definitely starting to see, and maybe reinvent the early season is starting to kick in as well. Lots of good announcements around serverless, around EDA, around some of these well architected sort of services and capabilities are coming online. So um yeah, it's never been easier to build a well architected, resilient and reliable workload on AWS. And I think the tools and the capabilities are definitely coming online to make it a lot easier for teams. But I think a lot of times when we did this in the past, it was quite sort of not academic, but there was quite a lot of knowledge you would have to ram in your head to think about and understand to deliver a resilient or a reliable workload. So I think the guidance and the tooling is getting a lot better than ever before to give you some like those guardrails and some of that guidance.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, even like we were like Adrian Cockcroft has been talking about continuous resilience for many years. Adrian, as usual, is way ahead of the curve. I think when he started talking about that, it was like really hard to do. Still hard, but there's now lots of really good tools available. And speaking of which, we were at a AWS Resilience Day this week in Belfast, which is good fun. And there was a lot of conversations about chaos testing, resiliency hub, correction of error, things like that. Like so, that was a good event.
Yeah, it was very good, and it was a really well run event. It was great. The speakers were fantastic, and the content was really good. They covered not only the well architected sort of framework sort of elements, but also then, like Dave mentioned, in the sort of that resilience modeling sort of capabilities, and they went over the resilience hub tool, which looks very promising. Some of the chaos engineering practices that we've been sort of advocating for quite a while, they get into with the fault injection service, which was again very good. But then into some of the more not academic, but more theoretical stuff around disaster recovery, business continuity planning. And then one of the bits that I really liked was the correction of errors, right? The incident analysis, post incident sort of responses. How do you incorporate some of these things into your ways of working, and how do you make sure that they don't happen again? And so yeah, all in all, a very good day. And if you get a chance, it's definitely something you should take a day to go and see.
Yeah. Um, it certainly wasn't lost on us as we were kind of sitting there. It was actually in the event was in the down the Titanic Hotel, and it was in the drawing room that the designers of the Titanic used. It's a big kind of cylinder shaped room with loads of windows on the ceiling. It was like obviously built 100 years ago, but or more than that. But that's where the architects would sit and design and all the ships that were built by Harland and Wolff over like 100 years ago. So it wasn't lost on us that we were sitting looking at all this Titanic artifacts, talking about resilience.
Yeah.
There's a lot of a lot of timely reminders that this stuff's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the later speakers today did reference it. It was like it was a gift that just kept on giving, right? It's right there for you, it's right? You can line this up. But one of the things we talked about a lot, and actually just talked about with Meg as well, is you know it's never just one thing, right? Oh, the Titanic sunk because it had an iceberg, but it's never just one thing. And delivering a reliable, resilient workload system is never just one thing that you do to make that happen, right? And for the Titanic example, it's funny. My 8-year-old daughter is doing the Titanic research as part of her school project, so a lot of the stuff comes out, right? And it's like it wasn't just the fact that they had an iceberg; it's the fact that the ship was on fire whenever they left harbor. The guy who had the keys to the binoculars didn't make the trip, so they couldn't get the binoculars, so they couldn't see the iceberg. Right? They didn't have enough lifeboats. Why did they not have enough lifeboats? Oh, the guy asked them to get more lifeboats, but because of time pressures, they wanted to sail on time. And why were they going so fast? Well, that's because the coal was on fire. And so they had to burn more coal. So they were doing 22 knots instead of a normal speed. And again, time pressures from the White Star Lines to beat the record or whatever, right? So leadership pressure. You can see where we're going with this, right? It's not just one thing. There's lots of different things that culminate in a disaster, right? It's not just the iceberg. It's all these small things that may seem innocuous or inconsequential in isolation, but when you build them up and then come in culmination, they then can result in a very tragic disaster, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's like it's interesting that. So you think about like resiliency and planning or thinking about resiliency with with your workload or your app or your whatever it is you're building. It's very you've got to be really proactive about it. Like in those Titanic scenarios, Mark, I'd imagine really what you're thinking is, did they try and simulate any of these types of things or practice their reactions to these types of things, or how would they detect whenever these sorts of issues are happening? And I think while I think there's a lot of technology certainly helps with resiliency, and you kind of mentioned some of those there, but I think a lot of it is just technique, isn't it? And process and practice. Like, how do you think about planning for sort of unforeseen circumstances? And I think, and that does kind of open the door. I know you mentioned Adrian, and I know Adrian's kind of, the whole Netflix sort of background with the chaos engineering, the chaos testing, the chaos monkeys and chaos gorillas, and I know they do all that. But that's genuinely interesting kind of way of thinking about stuff, isn't it? Like, what happens if we lose this part of the system or we lose this part of the system? What would we expect to see? How would we even recover in them types of scenarios? So in the Titanic, you could imagine they didn't maybe run too many of those types of scenarios. Maybe they had just way too much confidence in the ship, the unsinkable ship. No, I don't know.
And that's it. Like, it's in software, we're in a very enviable position where we can run lots and lots of experiments and run lots and lots of hypotheses for relatively little money, right? So these type of scenarios that would be very hard to do in the physical world with physical ships. What happens if you had an iceberg and the bunker's on fire, right? You're not going to simulate that too many times, right? At scale. But we can do that in software, right? We can do that in the cloud.
Yeah.
We can run these experiments. We can inject these faults and simulate what happens, right? And it's back to some of the just good engineering practices and good, well-architected practices around how are you testing? How are you gaining confidence in your system? What type of scenarios are you adding into your example mapping sessions to cover for what happens if, right?
Yeah, and you thinking like, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, but that's the correction of error stuff, because we have to remember that the Titanic is no different to like a modern project, because it's the human element. You know what I mean? You've got the media pressures on the company, competition with other companies, people being arrogant, ambitious, just not knowing what they don't know, being in a hurry, not enough money. All of the human elements when you're doing something big come into play. But the correction of error stuff is interesting because when you do that post-event analysis, it's not like, oh, your man forgot to do this, or your man didn't have the binoculars because they were locked. And it's like, well, what part of the system prevent that from happening? Well, let's not put a lock on the cupboard with the binoculars, because then that won't happen again. So it's with a correction of error, you don't think it's not the human error. It's what part of the system was designed that allows that error to happen. Because humans are humans. People are going to stuff's going to happen. You have to make it very, very hard to do the wrong thing. So it's exactly the same pressures, because White Star was a company like any other, even if there's normal pressures we all have.
Go ahead, Mike.
No, because I think that's the point. I mean, I think with things like with those tools and even kind of knowing the complexities of your system, there's only so much you can do up front, even with all those practices. Things are still going to go wrong. But when those things do go wrong, or that information is then really valuable. So if you're genuinely proactive about like, setting your RTOs, your RPOs, and running your chaos tests and stuff like that, you're up and you're when those things do happen, that information is actually really invaluable, because it does highlight maybe areas or show you weaknesses or, give you opportunity to kind of tighten things up. So for me, from an engineering perspective, it's genuinely a really interesting kind of area, I always kind of enjoy these scenarios as well because they're actually quite creative.
Very much so. And I think there's a couple of key elements here that you have to have a psychologically safe environment so that failure is a learning experience and it's something that you can use to improve. And I think it's also then you got to make sure you schedule in mechanisms to actually start to get people in this sort of headspace, right? Don't just expect it to happen on every random Friday that, hey, we're going to do some exploratory testing or some chaos engineering. Actually be proactive about putting in some schedules or some space in your plan to actually, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to do some exploratory testing, or we're going to do a chaos engineering, or we're going to do a game day. I think you can put good mechanisms in place to help at least surface some of these conversations and get everybody involved.
Well, what do you guys think? Go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say, and it might sound like it's optional as well to do this stuff, but when your system goes down, then you're losing a fortune of money every hour. it suddenly becomes you're sorry, it wasn't so optional, but yeah, go on ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
No, and I think you mentioned earlier in the call again where we're starting to see sort of more proliferation in terms of serverless adoption, serverless usage, things like EDA, which is kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of kind of, distributed kind of micro style, architectures. And I kind of feel in those areas that, resiliency and planning for kind of disaster and recovery is definitely something that's a real critical exercise.
I think it's still emerging, and I mean, and I always think the leapfrog thing, because you might think as a company we haven't started this yet. Just if somebody's listening, you think, oh, we have done none of that yet. It's a good time to start now. If you started this 10 years ago, you have to figure it all out. It's a bit like serverless or any of the cloud stuff. If you're in there at the start, you gotta knock a lot of corners off stuff and figure out how things work. If you start late, it's not a disaster because you can just use the latest and greatest, and you get all that. It's like standing on the shoulders of giants. So, like if you jump in there to something like Resiliency Hub, well architected tool, and Security Hub, there's a whole load of stuff just out of the box that you can use. As you say, Mark, it's never one thing. Like I think of the Perfect Storm as well, like the book that Sebastian Younger wrote about the ship went out of Gloucester, and I think it was 91, the big storm. It wasn't just the big storm that caused the ship to sink. It was a whole bunch of stuff. There was a whole load of stuff well documented. It was just this perfect storm of events that ends in tragedy. So I mean, that's what you have to be resilient against. So it's very interesting thinking this way. It's totally emerging as well.
Yeah, totally. And in the day, they went over some of the strategies for disaster recovery, from backup and restore to pilot light to warm standby to multi-site active. But there's almost like another strategy there around if you've embraced the serverless first, well-architected mindset, your workloads are intrinsically going to be more mature on that spectrum for disaster recovery than a more traditional workload, right? So there's things that you can do to almost have a lot more resiliency and reliability baked in. If you embrace a lot of the serverless managed services, you're getting a lot of multi-AZs, multi-regions, some of the services are even global, but you still need to plan for this stuff. But at least you're starting further down the road than somebody building all an EC2 themselves.
It's a huge point.
Yeah. And then, Lauren, I mean, it's some of the pillars of engineering excellence. I mean, you should be doing this anyway. It's effectively part of quality. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, it's the chaos tests and things like that for me as well. They build confidence. They give you, especially when you're doing things like EDA architectures, where you're maybe integrating with several different kind of, components or services in very different ways, and you're interested in kind of, what happens if one of these things goes out or goes down, and you're wanting to simulate those things, and you want to kind of, like game day it, let's go in and take one or two of them out and see how the team reacts and finds certain things and see how resilient the actual solutions are. So for me, it's a huge kind of confidence builder too. I'm trying to kind of, we do this a lot now, which is great, but
Yeah.
it is you every time you do it though, you learn, aren't you? There's always something there you're adding to your arsenal, your experience.
It's always something you didn't think of. I remember when I first started working, like, God, over 25 years ago, a long time ago. One of the first systems I worked on, I wrote a thing to detect the test was they were going to pull the network cable out of the machine. The machine had dual network cables, and we had to write a system that whenever you pull the network cable up, I was on the second one, and that was the actual test. You unplugged the thing, and it was running the telco system in Craic. But this stuff's not new, like, but it's evolving rapidly.
Yeah,
Good fun.
it's fun though. It's good.
Yeah. So that's the crack. We'll leave it at that. So we're back on the road again. We'll keep the podcast going. So please give us a like or subscribe on Serverless Craic. Have a look at the blog on the Serverless Age, and give us a like or follow at Serverless Age on Twitter. Thanks very much.
Yes, everyone.
Bye, guys.